Greetings, scholars, for the APUSH review for Unit 8 on the post-Civil War West. Looking from top to bottom on the review sheet. And the first question was an old APUSH question years ago: for whom was the West a land of opportunity? And some thoughts here to think about as we've gone through this unit. Place of opportunity for farmers, for exodusters, for ranchers, for cowboys, for miners, for railway builders, for those Chinese immigrants that helped build the Central Pacific in the West, for Mormons. Lots of people, the West was a land of opportunity. For whom was the West not a land of opportunity? Well, the most obvious would be the Indians. And other groups that suffered discrimination would be the Mexicans and the Chinese. The Indian Territory, once it was opened to white settlers at the end of the 1800s, became what state? And that state is Oklahoma. And the settlers who snuck in before the starting time were nicknamed the Sooners. Why were the Black Hills in Dakota invaded by white settlers in 1874? And the answer there is gold was discovered, and George Armstrong Custer is sent in to guard and to protect these trespassers. And later on, Custer and his troops are annihilated in 1876 at the Battle of Little Bighorn, which is in the southern part of Montana. And they're killed by Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull and the Sioux Indians. The importance of the buffalo, also known as the bison to the Plains Indians, is that the bison was their main food source. They would take the hides and wear them. They would take the hides and use them for teepees, for shelter. They took the bones and made tools out of them, and they took the dung and they would use that for fuel. So the buffalo was sort of a one-stop shop here. The importance of the horse: much earlier, horses had escaped from Spanish settlers in northern Mexico, and horses, as they're domesticated by the Plains Indians, increases their mobility and allows them to hunt buffalo much more easily. Why did the Plains Indians eventually have to move to reservations? Well, the big reason here is essentially military defeat at the hands of the U.S. military. But the U.S. military also killed the buffalo very deliberately, almost to the point of extinction. There's other industrial hunting and sportsmen, quote-unquote sportsmen, that are killing the buffalo as well. But this is very deliberate. The killing of the buffalo puts the Indians in a position of dependency. So the Indians are forced to move one way or other by the military, either defeat or killing of the buffalo. Bureau of Indian Affairs, the BIA, was responsible to help Indians adjust to the reservation life, and they were supposed to provide some provisions, some food. They were supposed to provide some farm equipment and things like blankets and on a regular basis, and they're famously notorious for stealing these supplies or providing the Indians with shoddy, inferior goods. What did the Dawes Severalty Act do, and what was the purpose of this act? The Dawes Severalty Act basically did away with reservations. The plan here is to turn the Indians into good Americans, to Americanize them, to assimilate them, and to get them to farm as individual farmers instead of living collectively and communally on a reservation. And before the reservations are put back into place in the 1930s, the Indians will lose about 2/3 of their land through this Dawes Severalty Act. What happened at Sand Creek in 1864, this is in the latter years of the Civil War. The Cheyenne Indians are massacred by Colonel John Chivington in southern Colorado, and these basically are Colorado volunteers avoiding the Civil War in the east by taking on defenseless Indians who were at peace at Sand Creek. Chief Joseph and the Nez Perce. The Chief Joseph has this famous keep-away retreat where the U.S. military pursues him about 1,500 miles through the West after trespassing whites are attacked by Indians, bringing a military response. And Chief Joseph has that famous quote, "From here I stand, from where the sun now sets, I will fight no more forever." And he's sort of, again, very symbolic of the eventual demise here of the freedom of the Indians in the West and their way of life. The Ghost Dance and its purpose. Ghost Dance is this dance which Indian religionists taught would bring back the buffalo and would make the whites disappear. and the Sioux at Wounded Knee in South Dakota are dancing in this frenzy, and they spook the soldiers who are watching them and surrounding them, and they're mowed down with guns. And symbolically here, 1890 is the end of the Indian Wars. 1890 is also the date, just to note, that the U.S. Census says, by definition, there is no more frontier. So this is a date of great symbolic importance. The Homestead Act, this is passed during the Civil War, 1862, in which a head of household can have 160 acres of western land if they farm on it for 5 years. And you had 400,000 head of households claiming this 160 acres of free land. The Morrill Land Grant Act, also 1862, it gives 30,000 acres of land to a state per member of the Congress, and these become the basis. These are supposed to be, the land is supposed to be the basis of supporting an agricultural university. Very popular program. The universities out in the West largely come from the Morrill Land Grant Act, and this was so popular that it essentially retroacted to states that were not Western states that had gotten statehood in the South and even in the East. So the Morrill Land Grant Act sets up a very vast system of colleges and universities, which become the basis of our modern colleges and universities. And if you're taking my class, I showed you a list of, it could be 100, 120 or so of these universities. How were railroads tied to Western economic growth? Well, the railroads brought settlers and immigrants and farmers to the West and brought Eastern goods such as train track, and as the West is developed, these trains would bring back food, would bring back grain, would bring back beef and wood and ore and resources back east. So you have this multiplier effect, this ripple effect, this virtuous cycle of prosperity that which is driven by the railway expansion and the railways bringing stuff back to the burgeoning eastern cities, increasingly filled with immigrants. Bonanza farms are these massive corporate farms of over 10,000 acres, and their farming very early on becomes very corporate. Pacific Railway Act in 1862, you have the Congress in the middle of the Civil War, it might be noted, is voting to begin building a railway from Omaha, Nebraska, and one going the other direction from Sacramento, California. The Credit Mobilier is a railway building company which is going to be giving stock to congressmen in share for continued land grants and subsidies. And the Credit Mobilier scandal is the most famous scandal up to this time in American history. Some things associated with this Pacific Railway Act: the use of Chinese immigrants by the Central Pacific, which is building from Sacramento heading east. And by the way, the two railroads, one heading east is the Central Pacific, the one heading west from Omaha is the Union Pacific. Union Pacific in particular, a lot of Irish immigrants, a lot of Civil War vets, both Confederates, mostly Unionists though, and they are going to meet at Promontory Point, which is north of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. How did the U.S. government aid railway growth in the West? Well, basically by these massive land grants. If you look at all the railways in American history, they're getting about 180 million acres of land, and this is more than the original 13 colonies had in their, in their geographic land mass here. And what's happening is these railway companies are becoming, next to the U.S. government, the largest owner of real estate in the West. And this land is being sold to farmers, and the railways are sending over agents to encourage immigrants to come over. And this, as the railways are built, they are going to have a monopoly on these farmers as their customers, and this will later become a problem which the populace will address. And this is a famous reform farmer party, which will be in the next unit as we look at reform movements. Long Drive, the nickname given to the movement from cattle from southern Texas, from the grasslands in southern Texas up to the railway towns like Abilene and Wichita, and those towns. Railways would take the cows back to, would prepare them, and these refrigerated boxcars would take them to the east, where they'd again be providing food for the growing cities in the east. Joseph Glidden, nothing to do with paint. Glidden is the guy who invents barbed wire. Barbed wire is real important out in the West where there's not a lot of trees, but you have a lot of cattle, and you're trying to fence these cattle in as ranching replaces the open range cattle drives, and as you want to separate the cattle from farmers' fields. Minority groups made up 1/3 of cowboys, and you should be familiar. You've got that 1/3 are Mexicans and blacks. So you have, the AP likes you to know social history, so something to plug into your memory banks here as we're moving towards the May test. Mining, control of, again, we have this stereotype or this image of the miner with his mule and his pan and his pick and his, he's just sort of the independent prospector, but that gives way very quickly to the, huge corporations which are raising money and just blasting through hydraulic mining of whole mountainsides. And both farming and mining have a huge corporate dimension, and there's a fair amount of environmental harm done by these hydraulic pump hoses that just blast away the sides of hills. Importance of the Western mines. One is money for funding the Northern War effort during the Civil War. And the Western mines are going to pull not just miners, not just prospectors, but they're going to pull settlers as towns are developed. And this is going to speed the Western political development of the West as towns and cities grow, and they're going to ask for statehood. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we went over. Do look over your notes, and I do have the my PowerPoint posted on RunWeb Documents. So study well, study hard, and good luck.